So we can start. Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with some Gita Mantras. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamrit Varshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Am Tvam Anusandhame Bhagavad Gita Bhavdveshane नमोस्तुते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयुध पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञान में प्रदीपः परपान पारिजाताय तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राय कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत् वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगत्कुरम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधारनी लोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सोतीर्णा खलु पांडवै रन नदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोज अमलम गीता अर्थ गंधोटकम नानाख्यान केसरम हरिकथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षट पदे रह पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरं यत्कृपा तमं वंदे परमानंद माधवम् यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थित तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are on chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, and if you remember last week Lord Krishna was telling us these three terms: karam, vikaram, and akaram. We all do karam. We are in a karam yoni. Nobody can be without doing the karam. Vikaram we should not do. Vikarams are the prohibited actions, the nishid karam. Okay, all the negative tendencies. So Lord Krishna says, don't do those. Okay. And then what is akaram? Ordinarily, people think that akaram means not doing any action. But according to the Gita's definition of akaram, if we look at the verse number 18, clearly he is telling us that we got to become akarmi. He who recognizes inaction in action and action in action is wise among men. Karmani akaramya pashyet akarmani cha karamya. So we got to learn how to become akarmi. He says he is a yogi and a true performer of all actions. So that means akarmi also performs the actions, the right actions, and with the right attitude also. That is akaram. And Lord Krishna doesn't leave us just like that over here. After giving us a beautiful guidelines, he elaborates on it. In the next 12-13 verses, how to become a karmi. Because a karmi is a yogi. A karmi. So to teach how to become a karmi, Lord Krishna says, let's start with the verse number 20 today. Tyaktvaha karam phal asangam nitya triptaha nirashraya karmani abhipravrittaha api na eva kinchit karoti sa. Tyaktva, given up, having abandoned. Karam phal asangam, attachment to the fruits of actions. So this is what we need to practice. One by one, all these sadhanas he is giving it to us to become a karmi. Nitya triptaha, always satisfied, ever content, nirashreha, depending on nothing. So it's without any dependence. Karmani, the actions, the activities. Abhipravritaha, engaged. Api means even. Na means not. Ev means verily. Kinchit, anything. Karoti, does. Sa means he. Having abandoned attachment to the fruits of actions. Okay. Ever content. Depending on nothing. He does not do anything, though engaged in action. So we have to cultivate these qualities in us in order to become a karmi. Actions cannot be classified by external appearances. So it's not that some of the actions are karams. It is the state of the mind that determines what is inaction and what is action. Because whatever he is telling us over here, that is from the mind. Mental dependence. So we got to become independent. Be content. Don't get attached to the fruits of the actions. He's not asking us to renounce the fruits of the action. There's a big difference. Nor is he saying that ignore them. He is warning us to renounce our mental slavery or intellectual clinging to the expected fruits. Only when we get preoccupied with the expected fruits of actions, we exhaust ourselves. Somebody says, no, I am on a diet, I got to lose weight. Expected fruit. Are going to work and I should get praise. Cooking for people, they should clap every time I make something. Expectations. We exhaust ourselves. And when we are exhausted, whatever we are doing, we don't even doing with the full energy. So Lord Krishna says, forsake your clinging to the fruits of action. Tyaktvaha karam phal asangam. Keep on doing what you need to do. Do not cling to the fruits of action. And the second thing he is saying, nitya triptaha, ever satisfied. Ever satisfied means there's no gurgling of the desires coming from your chitta. Completely satisfied in his intimate experience of the infinite as his own self. That's where the contentment comes. That's why Rishi Patanjali also said, Santoshat anuttamam sukha labha. So santosh or nitya tripta. Yeah, when you are nitya tripta, you do not feel any incompleteness. Because when we have a lot of desires, that means we feel less. We feel empty. So no desires. He acts in the world not seeking any fulfillment for himself. Then the next quality he said, nirashraya, depending on nothing. Ordinary person lives and functions depending entirely upon the quality and the quantity of the fruits of his actions. But on the other hand, a yogi, a sage, he is ever free from the demands of life. Whatever action he is doing, the action itself is sufficient reward for him. He acts always in the divine inspiration. That's how self-realized person acts. Because he has the experience of the infinite reality. So anxiety for the fruits of actions, the sense of discontentment, the feeling of dependency upon the things and beings of the world, all belong to the misconceived notion of the ego. And this wise person, this sage, this yogi, whatever you want to call him, is not that. He knows that this is ego. He knows this is Prakriti, and he knows who I am. That is a akarmi. Such an individual who has rediscovered the self. From outside, it looks like engaged in a lot of activities, but inside he knows I'm not doing anything. Because I am the Atma. Atma doesn't do anything. There is a beautiful story in the Purans which illustrate this point. You've all heard about gopis of Vrindavan. Once they kept a fast. And the ceremony of breaking the fast required them to feed a sage. And Lord Krishna advised them to feed sage Durvasa, who lived on the other side of the river Yamuna. The gopis, they prepared a delicious feast and started off, but found the river was very turbulent that day. And there was no boatman who was willing to take them on the other side. They came to Lord Krishna. They said, Krishna, what should we do? Lord Krishna said, go to Yamuna and say to Yamuna that if Krishna is a Akhand Brahmachari, then the river will give you the path. The gopis started laughing because they knew that how he used to dote upon them. But they went there, requested the river. What did the river do? The river gave them a bridge of flowers to walk on. Action in action. And then the gopis were astonished. They went across to the ashram of sage Durvasa. They requested him to accept the food. First, he wanted to take a small portion, but when he saw the disappointment on the gopis' faces, with his own mystic powers, he ate everything, whatever these ladies brought for him. Now there's a time to go back. How to go back? Rishi Durvasa said, tell Yamuna that if Durvasa has not eaten anything, give us the way. They saw him eating, but they went there and said the same thing, and again River Yamuna made that bridge made out of flowers for these gopis. So this is a clear example of action and inaction. Because we look at the actions only the outwardly. How about the mind? Where is the mind? When the body functions, we call it a life. It's a functioning. But who is established in the body? The self. If we identify with that self, then we become a karmi. Body is functioning. Body will function according to the needs. But inside, no perturbance. After the God experience, when the saint functions in the world outside, even though they are engaged in action, they are not doing anything. And Lord Krishna is telling us to be like that. Okay, and he is giving us a step by step. Tyaktva karam fal asangam nitya tripta nirashraya. We got to write these qualifications for our sadhana. Then more qualifications in verse number 21. Nirashihi yat chit atma tyakt sarva parigraha shariram kevalam karam kurvan na apnoti klibsham. Nirashi, free from expectations. That means without any desires. Yat chit atma. One with his mind and intellect controlled. Yat chit atma. Tyakta sarva parigraha. Having abandoned all sense of possessions. Parigraha. You remember Rishi Patanjali? One of the qualities he mentioned is aparigraha for a yogi. And this is exactly what Lord Krishna is saying. Tyakta sarva parigraha. Shariram, bodily. Kevalam, only. Karam, action. Kurvan, doing. Na means not. Apnoti, incurs. Kalibisham, sin. Without desire. That means free from expectations. With his mind and intellect controlled. Having abandoned all sense of possessions. Like ownership. Doing mere bodily action. He incurs no sin. Mere bodily activity is not action that will merit a reaction. An action can leave a mark on our subtle body only when we act with an egocentric consciousness. So that's why he's saying, one with his mind and intellect controlled. Because ego draws its sustenance from the hopes of the future. That's why the very first thing he said, free from expectations. We are weakening the hold of ego on us. So in this verse, Lord Krishna is declaring that an individual, when he has completely renounced hopes, expectations, when he has brought his body and mind under perfect control, when he has relinquished all sense of possessions, can no longer sustain the illusory concept of the ego in him. Okay, so let go of those clutches of the ego on us. We need to cultivate these qualities. When the ego has ended, the actions performed by that individual, that sage, that yogi, there is no permanent mark upon his mental constitution then. No more marks, just doing it for the sake of doing it. That's it. Ego is not involved in it. Just like if I'm sleeping and I kick somebody who's sleeping with me, there is no effect as if I'm awake and I kick somebody. Okay, so a yogi has the control, that kind of a control, even while being awake. Okay, there's a question over here. Somebody said, hope belongs to the ego. Hope belongs to the subtle body. So it could be ego, it could be intellect. Okay, that's where the hope. We are hoping this happens. Subtle body. Okay, and ego is part of the subtle body. A self-realized saint's activities do not touch him at all, since he is not the actor. Actions, what happens to the actions? Actions just to flow through him. That's what's happening. And such a great person becomes not a doer of actions. His actions, through his actions, he is serving Lord's creation. He becomes an instrument. He's not doing it for himself, only for the Lord. Because who owns this? Because if we say that we don't own it, tyakta sarv parigraha, but we do see things, we see the Prakriti. Who is the owner of this Prakriti? God is. That's why we say that when we do the yajna, idam namam, nothing is mine. God, you have given me so much, but I remember that nothing is mine. That is a non-possessiveness. And saints live like that. Not only utter these words, but they live like that. So any activity undertaken by a perfect master does not and cannot bring any consequences upon him. Because he's only a divine instrument. And that's what he means over here when he says, Na apnoti kalibshyam. There's no sin accrued. Because he's not doing it. Just like I said, if in my sleep I kick somebody, there's no fight. I was not present there. Sure, my body was, but I was not present. Yadrichaha labh santushtaha dvand atita vigat sapraha samasiddhau asiddhau cha kritva api na nibadhyate. Yadrichaha labh santushtaha, content with what comes to him without effort. Okay, so he acts effortlessly. Whatever comes, that's fine. Dvand atita, free from the pairs of opposites. Vigat vimatsaraha. Matsarya is jealousy. So free from jealousy. Vimatsaraha. Samaha, even-minded. Siddhau, in success, or siddhau, in failure. Cha means and, kritvaha, performing, acting. Api means even, na nibadhyate. Na means not, nibadhyate means is bound. So he is giving us more arrows towards for our sadhana, to become a karmi, content with what comes to him without effort. Okay, free from the pairs of opposites and envy, even-minded in success and failure, though acting is not bound. Is not bound. He takes these dualities in stride. We got to learn to rise above the dualities. To learn to be equanimous in every situation. We have to develop detachment. That's what basically he is telling us. So this kind of a person who has gone beyond ego, and after that there's no desire prompted activities with any definite fruit motive. Because whenever we make the effort because we want certain outcome. So naturally, this kind of a person will feel quite content and happy in whatever gain spontaneously rises out of his actions. He's content. He takes it almost as a prasad from God. I did what I needed to do, whatever I'm getting, it's a prasad for me. So this is a state of egolessness. It's a condition of perfect conquest over the mind and intellect. When we can cultivate these qualities, when such a master of realization lives among us. When we look at this person, he doesn't look any different from an ordinary sense, but at the same time, this person's activities show a little extra dynamic capacity. We often wonder, how is this person achieving so much? Where is this person getting the energy? Because that person is a karmi. So to explain the divine nature and attitude of this master, how he acts in the world, next 9 verses, Lord Krishna is opening up for us further, so that we can, so this is like the same theme. Still he's talking about akarma, because he said the yogi is a karmi, but next 9 verses, it's a more elaboration on that. Okay. Gat sangasya muktasya gyan avasthit chetasa yagyaye achartaha karma sumagram pravaliyate. Gat sangasya, who is devoid of attachment, muktasya, of the liberated, gyan avasthit chetasa, whose mind is established in knowledge. What kind of a knowledge? Divine knowledge. Okay. Yagyaye. Yagya is a sacrifice. Sacrifice. Achartaha, performing. Karam is action. Samagram, completely. Praviliyate is dissolved, freed. Of one who is devoid of attachment, who is liberated, whose mind is established in knowledge, who acts for the sake of sacrifice. All his actions are dissolved. If you remember, the title of this chapter is Gyan Karam Sannyas Yoga. That's why he is going through in a detail in these verses. What is a Gyan? What is a Sannyas? And what is a Karam? Gyan Karam Sannyas. So in this verse, Lord Krishna is almost summarizing the conclusion of the last 5 verses actually. So our dedication should be to God. God. Whatever we do, we are doing it for God. Whatever. Whether we are eating or whether we are sleeping, whether we are helping, whether we are walking, all our actions for God. Then we can dissolve all our actions. So let's look at these qualifications in this verse also, beautifully enumerated. And actually, if you look at each word by itself, it's pretty clear. Gata sang. That is the very first term he used, devoid of attachment. So a wise person is he from whom all is attachment. Attachment with what? With the finite. He's not talking about the attachment with the Lord, attachment to the finite things. Attachment to these worldly things has dropped away. And this attachment is a mental attachment. Physically, this person is still living in a house or even in a hut or in the body, will eat, will sleep, but mental attachment he's talking about. Muktaha, second term, liberated. The majority of the seekers have only a vague idea of what this liberation means actually. Our opposite of liberation is what? Bondage. We have created many bondages on our personality. And we feel trapped. And these bondages are infinite in number for us. And these are the subtle codes of our own attachment with the things, with the people, with the situations. As a body, we get attached to the world of its sense objects. As a mind, we live like a slave to the world of emotions. And as an intellect, we get bound with our own ideas. Those are all bondages, all attachments. So he is telling us, get liberated from this. Pay attention to it. World of objects, of emotions, and of ideas cannot of themselves bind the Supreme. But it's the ego. When we identify ourselves with that, that is the ego. Ego stupidly gets itself bound through these cords, very subtle cords. Then he says, Gyan avasthita chetasaha, whose mind is established in knowledge, in the divine knowledge. So perfect detachment produces a sense of complete liberation. So when the mind of the seeker gets centered in the right kind of a discrimination, that kind of a knowledge, and that's what Lord Krishna is saying, that the sage does perform work, all his activities undertaken, performed by him, are ever done in a spirit of dedicated activity. This yagyai. Second line, the first word, yagyai. So his actions are done as a yagya. Yagya means dedicated activities. So whenever this yogi or a sage functions in a spirit of yagya, that action itself does not produce any reaction. There is no more thicker bondages. The new actions, there's no bondages, and with the help of the yagya, the old impressions also, they become weaker and weaker. So remember, yagya means a self-dedicated activity performed in a spirit of service to the many. That's a yagya. You are doing it, but you are doing it for the benefit of others, remembering God. That's the divine knowledge. So now we'll see that next 6 verses, he's enumerating 12 different yagyas. Most of us are familiar with that Havan yagya, when we burn the fire and we give the ahutis. But Lord Krishna, he is giving us 12 different kinds of a yagya. That means the whole life can be a yagya, morning till evening. Morning till evening, if all our actions, all our activities are performed in a spirit of service to the many, remembering God, that's a yagya. That's why the very first on this list of 12 yagyas, in verse number 24, this is a chant before we eat food. Okay? And we eat several times a day. And if we can remember God every time we eat, it becomes a yagya. Brahmarpanam, Brahmavi, Brahm Agnyo, Brahmanahutam, Brahm eva ten gantavyam, Brahm karam samadhina. Brahm is that supreme reality. Arpanam, the oblation, offerings, arpan karna. Havi means the offerings, like a clarified butter when we put into the havan, into the fire. Brahm Agnyo, that is sacrificial fire. The fire of Brahm Agnyo. Brahmanaha, by Brahma, Hutam is offered. Ev means only, ten means by him, Gantavyam, attained, reached. Brahm karam samadhina, by the person who is absorbed in action, which is Brahma. Samadhi is absorption. Brahm is the oblation. Brahm is the clarified butter, etc. So whatever constitutes the offerings, that's all Brahm. By Brahm is the oblation poured into the fire of Brahma. Brahm verily shall be reached by him who always sees Brahma in all actions. So whether we are doing a ritual, but as I said earlier, before eating, there are a lot of people, they recite this mantra also, because they don't want to forget God for a very basic thing which we do several times a day, remembering God. This food is God. The act of putting the food in the mouth, that is Brahma. The digestive fire is Brahma. All of this is Brahma. There's nothing but Brahma. So very famous verse actually. We know that whenever there is a yajna, there are 4 essential factors. And that's what he's mentioning over here. One factor is the deity invoked to whom the oblations are offered. Deity. The second is the fire in which the offerings are poured. Third is the material things that constitute the offerings. And fourth is the individual who's performing the yajna. These are the 4 things. So here in this verse, the mental attitude and the experience of that yogi when he performs the yajna. To this yogi, truth alone exists. Brahma alone exists. Not the delusory polarity. So that's why all yajnas arise from Brahma, in which Brahma, the truth, is the performer. Even the material is Brahma. The sacred fire is Brahma. Invocation is Brahma. It's almost like all waves are nothing but the ocean. We don't say that this big wave is not part of ocean or small wave is not. They're all part of ocean. So that's how all the actions, all the material which we use, where the material is going, it's all Brahma. So the significance of this particular verse, like a prayer to be said before food, is pretty evident that in order to live, we must eat. Food is necessary for existence. We all get hungry several times a day. We eat food. So the suggestion is made over there that even at the moment of natural enjoyment, we should not forget the great truth. That is Brahma. Just remember or pay a little attention, think about it. If you remember God before eating, will you eat something which is prohibited? Just like a basic habit of eating becomes sattvic. If you can remember this. Because the great truth is that food is Brahma. And we are invoking nothing but the grace of the Brahma. Blessings of Brahma. So to keep this idea constantly in our mind is to get perfectly detached from the enjoyment and raise ourselves to a greater and endless beatitude. Okay? Because normally what we do, we eat because it tastes good. Over here he says, eat. Food is Brahma. Act of eating is Brahma. It's going the fire, the gastric fire itself is Brahma. So basically, what is a yajna then? Yajna, bhavana makes every action a yajna. Because this is the bhavana. Because sometimes we can recite this mantra beautifully, but if the bhavana is not there in our mind, these are just only singing the mantra, then it's not going to have any effect. Okay? So bhavana makes every act a yajna. Okay. Let's look at the next verse where he is starting enumerating those 12 yajnas for us. Devam ev apare yajnam yogina paryupasate brahm agnyo apare yajnam yagyen ev upjuhvati. Devam, celestial gods, so pertaining to the Devtas. Ev means indeed only. Apare, others or some. Yagyam, sacrifice. Yoginaha, yogis. Paryupasate, worship, perform. Brahm Agnyo, in the fire of Brahm. Apare, others. Yagyam, sacrifice. Yagyen, by sacrifice. Ev means verily. Upjuvati, offer as sacrifice. So he's mentioning two yajna over here, Dev yajna and Brahm yajna. Some yogis perform sacrifice to Devatas alone, Dev yajna, while others offer sacrifice of the self, Atma itself, as sacrifice by the self in the fire of Brahm. Okay. So we'll see that in the next few verses, Lord Krishna is explaining the mental attitude of a yogi at work. It's a mental attitude. Remember that, it's a bhavana. So Dev Yajna. Dev word comes from a root word, Div. Div means illumination. Subjectively, when we view this word, the greatest Devtas are our 5 sense organs. Those are the Devtas. Like eyes, they illuminate forms and colors. So they illuminate. Ears illuminate the sounds. The nose illuminates smell. And the tongue and the skin, taste and the touch. So there's an illumination there. These are the Devtas in this beautiful body. So seekers and yogis, when they move in the world, sure, they perceive the sense objects. They see a beautiful flower. They see beautiful clouds through the sense stimuli. But in their understanding and experience, perception is but a world of sense object. Continuously, they keep on offering into the fires of the perception in order to invoke the Devtas. They never forget that these are the Devtas. My eyes are the Devtas for me. My ears are the Devtas. So even at the time of perceiving something, never forgetting, these are the Devtas. When they come across the sense world, they only recognize and experience that the world of object is paying a devoted tribute to the power of the sense perception. Okay? So continuously yajna is happening for these saints. So mental attitude constantly by this seeker, detached from the sense experiences, irrespective of the quality of experience. So that means this person is maintaining a constant sense of equanimity. Seeing something beautiful, but equanimous mind. Hearing something, but still there's an equanimous mind. And then the second one, he said, Brahm Yajna, offer the sacrifice of the self. That really means a surrender. That means Atam Samarpan. Brahm Yajna. Offer the sacrifice of the self as the sacrifice by the self in the fire of Brahma. We got to analyze it subjectively, what he is trying to tell us. We think that objects are giving us the enjoyment and the pleasure. But the perfect masters, they understand that the sense organs are only instruments of perception. They cannot work only when in contact with the Atma. So they never forget that Atma part. So that is a true understanding of this Atam Samarpan. All masters, they live allowing the sense organs to sacrifice themselves in the knowledge of Brahma. So that means dedicating their sense life in the service of the world. So, but that is the bottom line. So these devatas are given to me. I need to use them to help God's creation. When a person's sense organs of perception and actions are to function and act, not for his own selfishness, not for his only egocentric satisfaction, but for the sake of serving society or the world, then this kind of a person lives in the world of object, but he will not be enslaved by the attachment to his possessions. That is Brahma Arpanam is. Because the sense objects, they can never enslave us. They can enslave the ego when we identify ourselves with the ego. But when we have completely released ourselves from the ego, then there's no enslavement. So let's stop it here. Think it through, because we can all see how we can practice this. But remember that in order to reach here to this point, he told us the previous 4 or 5 verses, those qualifications we need to cultivate in our personality. Then we can clearly understand what this Dev Yajna is and what Brahma Yajna is. Otherwise, these are just the terms for us. And next week, we will learn more about the different yajnas also, 10 more yajnas. So far, 2 yajnas, according to Lord Krishna. But the whole life has to be a yajna rupi. For who? For a akarmi, for a yogi. Okay, a yogi. So let's stop it here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much for coming.